Welcome back to GrokTALK, brought to you by GrokTALK.com and the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. Coming to you live almost every weekend on Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time from beautiful, mostly beautiful, Concord, New Hampshire.
It's looking nice outside now.
It is very nice today and very nice tomorrow, which means right after I leave here, I will be going home to do yard work.
The lawn, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
It is what it is.
I have to mow the lawn I have and grow the lawn I don't.
Yep.
The weekend.
I got to go cut my weeds.
Basically, I just, it's like when I take the dogs out. Let's go feed the mosquitoes, you know, and that's really what it's like. So, and Mike's back. Hi, Mike. Mike, you there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I'm here.
I just wanted to make sure we got you back in so that you could get back at me for making fun of you.
So you were asking about spending or priorities. And,
yes.
Steve mentioned the O'Brien plan regarding cross-border insurance, which is certainly one piece of an overall strategy that I think that has to involve. You ask about priorities, and it has to be I think broader and more comprehensive because it affects areas such as business taxes, the cost of doing business, which includes healthcare benefits. Think about workman's comp. I think there are issues of fraud going on in workman's comp everywhere.
Everywhere there's anything like that. Medicaid fraud, obviously, which was, and part of the O'Brien plan was designed to get us out of this Medicaid expansion problem. Because if you don't have people on Medicaid, then you don't have a problem with expansion because it's not expanding. Okay, and then you don't need the money, and then you can just say, screw you, we don't need the money. And you're not going to do that if you don't get people incentivized to do something different that's better for them. Now, if a private insurer has a buffet plan and you just pay for what you want, either through your employer or yourself, because you could really get yourself in that situation, like with car insurance, where you're paying for it yourself because it's just what you want. You don't need Medicaid. And we have to get out of that expansion plan that we've passed, and we need a way to do it. And maybe you have some more ideas.
Well, I'd like to see it in conjunction with a health savings account. So a lot of people are familiar with 401ks now. I think they're very comfortable with the concept around being able to make it portable, something that survives beyond them for their family. This makes a lot of sense.
Does Mike? You had something to say?
I did. Hang on a second. I was just switching to speaker temporarily, but I switched back to the headset. So I did. One of the things about about Medicaid is as long as the federal government keeps taking the money from us, the states feel obligated to try and get some of it back. What you need is enough of the states to turn around and tell the feds, hell no, just stop the program, we'll run it locally. That's a tough road to hoe, but in the meantime, the less federal poison we have to take, the better.
How many governors do you need to get that in effect?
One.
Really just one. But...
Or supermajorities in the House and the Senate?
No, at a federal level, I thought the governors had the ability at maybe 37 or 38 votes to be able to affect the federal legislation.
That's an amendment, or are you just talking about?
Then it must be an amendment that I'm thinking. Well, I'm just how do we defund Medicaid? Same thing with Department of Ed. How do you defund any of these programs? The Department of Environmental Services up here. You can't shrink government unless someone starts putting some pressure on the financing. I mean, you don't get growth in government unless you keep letting bureaucrats grow their budgets. You can stop that is starting to defund them.
The problem is we never get a quorum of angels in Washington that will actually cut the budget. And so at some point the states will have to force Washington to do with less.
I think in New Hampshire's situation we want to get ourselves in a position where we don't have to rely on their money. Because right now, I mean, 70% of our budget is federal money or something like that.
It is.
It's huge. So we're pretty much just bent over a barrel, and nobody's really trying hard to get us off the barrel. They're just saying, push a little harder, push a little harder. And, you can't even as a governor say, well, okay, so I have this $11 billion budget, and $9 billion of it comes from down there. And I'm just going to tell them to go screw? No, you can't just drop $9 billion out of your budget, or whatever it is. I'm just throwing out numbers.
Concord fails this, and so I think they forget that we're also all federal taxpayers.
Right.
Well, and I made that argument during the Medicaid expansion where I told several of our New Hampshire state senators, face to face, because we are such a small state, I can go do that. And I said, I'm tired of listening to the rhetoric, Senator Morse. Don't tell me that you're here to protect New Hampshire taxpayers, because everybody in this room is also a federal taxpayer. And you're about to lay on another burden on top of us. Because remember, Senator, and you too, Steve, Although I have an idea that you're going to be much more appreciative of this. We are the people who, the taxpayers, look up through our local government, and then up to our county government, and then up to our state government, and then finally up to the federal government. So we've got all these people raining down upon us and hoovering our wallets. And at some point, it doesn't matter the inter-level squabbles that go on. All I see is dollars that I can no longer spend on my family because I'm such a selfish guy. I want to spend it on my sons and my wife, and perhaps maybe I make the decision of a good charity to give to, but instead all of these politicians all the way up and down the chain keep saying, no, we're going to make you give to our charities.
Because we know how to hand out your money better than you do.
And Skip, you politely refer to it as rain.
Yeah, I didn't tell you what color it was.
Yeah. Well, and with the pressure on the budgets, what you're going to say, I mean, the federal government is going to put more pressure on state budgets. We look at the Medicaid expansion plan, we know that money is going to go away in the future, and which party is going to pull that benefit back from the people who are receiving the state. And so the state then puts pressure on local, county, and local governments, and people's local property taxes, they're feeling it already. I mean, so it's just a matter of time before it hits on a local level.
And it really drives me nuts because there's already rumors. You already mentioned the number of the day, $18 trillion in the hole at the federal level. There's already rumors that the feds aren't going to be able to pay that 100% for the first 3 years. And not one of these New Hampshire State Senate Republicans would deign to answer the question, what happens next? All they'd say is, well, then we have, it goes out of business unless we re-vote it in.
A sunset.
Well,
provision.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I look them in the eye and go, really? You really expect us to understand and accept that as truth, that it'll just go away?
It's Alaska in the summertime. Sun never quite sets.
Yeah, some other stuff never quits either.
Yeah, no kidding, huh?
No.
Yeah, we have to bring it to a screeching halt sooner rather than later, because once it's got a critical mass of people on it, you'll have a very hard time killing it.
I don't know how to stop that now. The word is, well, it's law. What are you going to do about it?
Here's the thing: you can, if it's a state law, you can repeal it or pass a different one. If it's a federal law and it's not constitutional, if you have a legislature and a governor who are willing to stand up and go, we don't have to do that, then you can. But like we said, there's so much money tied to it. You first need a plan to get yourself off that dole. So, what's the plan? I mean, what do we do to get off the federal dole so that we can then say to the federal government, you've passed a lot of these laws, be they gun laws, Obamacare, whatever, any law, pick a law that isn't really constitutional, shouldn't come from the federal government, something that should be a state level law, something that the states are empowered and their people to do. Once you're off the dole, you can actually say, you know what, we're not going to enforce that because it's not constitutional. We're going to do our own thing because that's what we're supposed to do. But how do you get to that point? I mean, we talked about the O'Brien plan, there's a lot of money. We have to find a way to get out from under all of that.
Well, I would say it goes back to priorities. And my question to you, Steve, yes, you should
The
be.
two priorities. One is reducing government spending, and two is creating the environment where we're going to bring more companies and more jobs to the state, because a rising tide ultimately floats all boats. We're going to get more state even with a lower business profits tax, we will get more state revenue, even with a lower tax, because we have more companies and more people working, more opportunity for people in the state.
What's the Kenda plan for doing that?
Lowering business profit taxes. I mean, that has to be done. I think the only way you can justify lowering taxes and maintaining a balanced budget is reducing spending. And I think it has to be, it's not a spending freeze, as the governor would like, but it has to be an across the board. I'm not up there. I'm not reviewing state contracts. I know that there are state contracts up there that desperately need to be reviewed. For example, there's a contract coming up in January. It'll be a 5-year renewal. I won't mention the company name, but there are 47 pieces of technology equipment on that list. 23 of them are tape subsystems. And we're going to pay $3 million. Tape subsystems.
Tape?
Yes. 23 of the 47 items are tape subsystems. And we're going to pay $3 million a year for the privilege of this company maintaining those. Now, the equipment's in 2008, the contract's negotiated in 2010, and there's a head of IT who's signing off, to a head of administration that this is all okay, go ahead with it, and now it's going to come up with a 5-year option here at the end of January. But who's sitting down and asking the question, how legitimate is the equipment? Should this be renegotiated? Should it be revisited, with the vendor in a new contract negotiation? Who does that? Because it's very easy now that the people are out there, the option is out there, the contract is out there, is just to sit there and, okay, yep, another 5 years, let's sign off on it. Who is reviewing this? And that's one example of 3 million a year. Now, how many other contracts are out there that are in desperate need of review, and whose job is that?
That's actually the executive council's job to be doing the review of that type of stuff. But the question is
they're clearly not doing it to the depths necessary.
That's correct. I mean, we're all techies at Granite Rock. Software engineers, hardware engineers, network engineers. In fact, Mike on the line is one of the premier network engineers and problem solvers in the nation. And we're happy to have his expertise that comes with that. But we all work in high tech. So, immediately I know that I'm thinking cloud-based.
Exactly.
I can buy a
cloud. I could buy pennies on the dollar for storage.
Yeah, a couple trillion
there
bytes
are
on a little hard
hundreds
disk.
of House members using far more efficient systems with their smartphones in session.
But how would you know? You don't.
In that country.
You don't even have one.
Because I have email and I have Twitter and I have all this stuff, and they send me things, and I post them at GrokTALK.com.
Yeah. But
you were asking
my question is it not so much the contracts, because once the money's been appropriated by the House and the Senate, the money's there, the contracts are going to be let. But isn't it a case that we're not making the right priority setting? Because to Democrats, to progressives, government must be in everything. De Tocqueville, when he was here in the 1840s, was marveling at American society because it was functioning the way the founders said. A small, limited government that took care of the stuff that was supposed to protect our liberties and our private property, the individuals over here, and then this big civil society where people voluntarily banded together to fix problems. They would band together, fix the problem, and then just disband and go on to the next thing. Is it a case where you could go into the Senate and go, listen, folks, we need to have a priority listing. It's not enough to be, kvetching about these bad bridges for the last 10 years. We have to move from, and it can't be just siloed, that here's my priorities for this, and priorities for this, priorities for this. Stack them all up and say, look, the highest priority of this should be up here. And as I was saying before the break, Maggie Hassan wanted to buy $2 million worth of adult diapers for something else instead of giving it to UNH. I'm sorry, at this point I would say, isn't it better to take that $2 million and put it into the bridges, just as an example? That we see a lack of want and will to do the right priorities for what government should be doing at the proper level of government of the state.
Well, priorities would imply that there's a strategic plan, which would imply that there's a vision for the state, right? So do we have a collective vision for where we want the state to be, what we want it to look like, and how it should be shaped? And so when I was looking at the race 2 years ago, I was building a foundation in terms of education for our kids, pushing back on the federal government with 10th Amendment battles that could be won, creating an environment where businesses wanted to create jobs and bring more employment to the state, and reducing the overall spending environment. I think a lot of it, even as a senator, could probably be more effective in my district working with fellow senators trying to implement those things than even a governor can.
Andy Sanborn actually, in the last election cycle, was talking a lot about saving money through efficiencies in the existing bureaucracy, and he had already started to lay out his thoughts on that, and some of them were technical. And some of them were just, obviously bureaucracies with layers of bureaucracy inside them.
Whether it's the O'Brien plan or contract review or looking at spending, those are all pieces. But I think ultimately what you need is the bigger picture. And I've never seen a bigger picture come out of the governor's office, and I'm not sure that anything is emanating out of the House and the Senate either. You need to decide that we say we are going to create an environment both for our kids and for companies to help everyone in the state flourish. We're going to move away from the progressive concept of creating victims and give people a hand up, not a handout. It's all part of a mindset, but you have to get everyone to buy into it, and I just don't see that happening with our sitting governor.
We're going to take 60 seconds to poke another sitting Republican senator with a stick, and we'll be right back.
He tried to make us believe he was a fiscal conservative, but State Senator Jeb Bradley has been deceiving New Hampshire taxpayers. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, he claimed to be one of us, pretending to blend in, but all along voting like a liberal Democrat. And oh, how he drooled at the opportunity to vote to expand Obamacare, which will result in higher taxes and longer wait times in the emergency room. And now, Senator Bradley is leading the charge to try and pass a Senate bill to prevent us from criticizing his vote. Call Senator Bradley at 603-569-4208 and tell him that we're on to his wolf in sheep's clothing routine. Tell him to stop pretending to be a fiscal conservative and start voting like one. Paid for by Citizens for a Strong New Hampshire.
GrokTALK.
Okay. The conversation continues.
We shall.
We're here with Steve Kenda, candidate for District 24. Correct?
Yes, 24.
State Senate District
Yes.
24. Currently seated, held by Nancy Stiles,
Yes, one of my rogue Republicans.
one of the rogue Republicans. Yes. And so we had a little discussion, and did we finish that last thought when we went
Not
to the
quite.
Not quite.
Not quite. I was in the process of asking. You said something about state and education, and my question is, here in New Hampshire, local control has always been important. Now, Steve had mentioned Jimmy Carter's Department of Education.
He mentioned it first.
Okay, but I can use your name. You mentioned it just before, that which spurred the question.
Okay, all right. I don't want to take
Sheesh.
credit that's not due me.
Sheesh, Steve. And we've seen that since Jimmy's ill-fated Department of Education, things have not gone well at all with education here in the United States.
$70 billion a year budget, by the way.
Yeah. And what do we get? Race to the top and an overall graduation rate, especially in our urban centers of the country, of about 35%. Yeah, that's worked out real well for us, these national plans. But you mentioned that the state has a role here in education, and of course our Department of Education has blithely gone ahead and adopted Common Core, which lots of states are throwing away because they're starting to realize this is nothing more than just yet another fad that just has lots of money behind it. Intrusive data collection, data mining, 400 individual data points per child that's supposed to follow them not just through school, but through their entire work life. Alarm bells should be going off in your head. Here in New Hampshire, we have a history of having local control, local school boards. Now, I'm having a problem with my local school board, if you've been watching Granite Grok, and I bet others are too, but that's really where the power should be. Do we even need a Department of Education that's overriding the local control? I mean, how do you see the educational layout, how it should be versus how badly it's screwing up? And I just say screwing up because we're seeing the lack of results. We're spending more and more money in every single standardized test. We're not seeing the commensurate improvement.
Well, let's start with the big picture, because I don't want to put this all on the teachers. I think there are some good teachers out there. I know I grew up with some very good teachers that helped me. Of course, this was pre-Department of Education, 1979. And so I don't want to put all the blame on the teachers. I think kids are subjected to a great number of other, I'll call them negative cultural influences. I think Hollywood and the media cast negative images around education. You have to sit there and watch O'Reilly's Waters World to take a look at what's going on in education today. Look at the liberal media, the Lane Street Press, their focus, their lack of focus on what's happening in education. I think it even stretches to the activist liberal judiciary that's been put in place. I mean, there are these other major cultural effects, activities that are taking place beyond just the teachers. And then, of course, they're also heavily influenced by the NEA and the NTF, the unions, which have really done a disservice to
the Bill Ayers
teachers.
effect.
And Bill Ayers. It's a combination of all of those things. And so I don't want to put all the burden on the teachers. And I think the teachers are now just starting to wake up to the negative potential that Common Core is. And I think my thrust comes from, I think ultimately we as parents are responsible for our children's education. And either we take an active role in what's going on. I think we have very passively let local school boards and supervisory the SAUs more or less moved to the progressive front. The Board of Education moved to the progressive front, and I think all of it has now coalesced with, as Steve said, the $69 billion a year Department of Education budget, so that they can do all of what's being discussed. Now, in 1995, I know they dumbed down the SAT results. I know it was designed to, again, protect the education establishment, the fact that the results. So 16 years after the Department of Education was set up, they had to first dumbed down the set of results so that they would look better. And now it's 16 years later with the implementation of Common Core to try something else to improve overall results. When I think there are a whole host of societal influences that are negatively affecting education on a broader level. And I'd love to go after all of the cultural issues, but I think we as Republicans need to start in the first place that's hitting home most for people, which is about finance, the economy, and jobs. And the issue, I'm not a supporter of Common Core. I believe that parents need to be more involved at a local level, and I don't think either the federal involvement. I'm not even happy with the Board of Education here in the state. To the extent that as a senator I can do something about that, it's a priority for me, because I think building the foundation of the future means giving the kids the education that I had, and I think it was a much better grounded and rounded education. If you've taken a look at any of the Common Core math problems, those alone should scare people.
I put up a video of that yesterday or the day before. I just could not believe it.
Yeah, and I'm just glad that I see teachers waking up to it. I see parents waking up to it.
A lot of teachers don't like it.
And state governments are now, obviously, as we see in Oklahoma and South Carolina, are now beginning to sit up and take notice that this is probably another fad, and it's going to result in another failure, and we can't afford another generation that is so easily brainwashed as the last one.
Now, I always liked it when we bring up the $60 or $70 billion budget for the Department of Education. I always like to ask people at the local level, well, what would you do if you had that money here instead of over there? I mean,
think about the advances that have taken place with technology. Right? Are you familiar with the Khan Academy at all? I mean,
yes.
3,000 videos available for free, online available, where teachers can have a dashboard. They sit there, they can watch the progress of each individual student. A teacher can identify which kids are able to accelerate on their own with learning assignments, whereas the other kids that may be struggling, those are the ones they can focus their attention. And instead of having to teach to some normalized level where the gifted are held back and the ones that can't come up to the normalized level are still struggling. Instead of all the money that we spend and we spend the most amount per child in the entire world, and on infrastructure, I mean, the university system, repairing all these buildings and infrastructure. I mean, the digital infrastructure that we have, if we could just get broadband into every home so that every kid, the cost of laptops have come down to
couple $100.
And you put one, give a kid, take it, even if we do an experiment, 4th, 7th, and 10th grade, give each kid the laptop, and we'll maybe try it in a couple of districts where the teachers work with the kids and they use the new technology that's available to them, and let's just measure it, see how it does relative to the others.
You're bringing up a real good point that drives me crazy. I'm in the manufacturing arena. My company makes manufacturing software, but even when I was working for a manufacturer, if they wanted to do something, they would say, here's a control, we're just going to keep doing it the same old way, and here's the new way of doing it. Now let's compare them rigorously. And, I have 2 STEM degrees. You always know scientific hypothesis. Here's my control group, here's my experimental group. And you do that double blind, so you do this. But instead, in the educational field, just seems to be one fad, let's try this. You're right, I think we should do a controlled experiment to say, what is going to be better? And you do it for a couple of years because the kids mix, or the mix of kids, is going to change over a little bit, so you want to normalize that a little bit. But I'm going to throw this statement out at you, and it goes to more of a core philosophy. I got myself in trouble with this school board yet again. So
we got 3 minutes, so
okay,
shorten it.
I will. Every kid does not deserve a public education. They deserve a publicly funded education. Be that a government public school, a private school, a charter school, an online school, or homeschooling. They get very miserable when I say that.
Who gets miserable?
My local school board. Well, the chair is the past chair of the New Hampshire Association of School Boards, so you can tell where she comes from, Sue Allen. So my question is, when I say that to you, is that a positive thing, a negative thing, or
Well, it's important to me, based on my business background, is the effect of competition. Competition makes everybody more efficient, more productive. I think my problem with the university system is the whole tenure. I mean, the lack of meritocracy, and I have a real problem with that. I'm not sure how to change it, but if we take it back to the local K through 12 education, I know that there are people who say that, well, you're taking resources away from the public schools. And I say, well, I think public schools have more than enough resources today to be effective if they apply some of the technology issues that I brought up earlier. spread what's available education dollars, create a competitive environment, and force the teachers' union's hand. I mean, I think ultimately the unions have done more damage and destruction to our kids' education than perhaps even the social influences.
So saying that let the
Homeschooling, school choice.
let the money follow the child.
Right.
See, 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah, that actually worked out pretty well because I figured you were going to ask your question for 3 minutes, and then he'd have like 10 seconds to come up with an answer.
I've been known to talk long, setting up the questions.
He does. He does. He has a lot of things to share, which is fantastic, but sometimes you got to share short so your guest can share.
Education is important, but we want to make sure that we have jobs for those kids when they graduate. And
Yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, and not jobs in education, necessarily.
or government.
Or government.
For such a small state, are we over-licensed? We got a gazillion boards that determine whether or not you can work in a particular field or not. You know, when you have to spend 1,500 hours just to be able to cornrow hair or paint nails or do other, doing the eyebrow thingy, go through the whole cosmetology thing, I think we've overdone it. That we've used government as as a barrier to entry in and of itself.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. When I was one of the reasons I got politically involved was because I had a competitor that put forth legislation down. This is a D.C. that was signed at the 11th hour in the week between Christmas and New Year's, and it was basically designed to put my business out of business. And I said, all right, well now I'm waking up to politics. This is the way it works. And I think Marco Rubio has made a point of this. So what we need is to make sure that we keep a competitive landscape and that legislation is not used to create anti-competitive barriers. And so when you asked me the question, I wonder what drives some of the licensing. Is it bigger companies trying to reduce competition? Is it, where's that coming from? In which case, I'd have to answer it. And yes, without more information, without more detail, I will know enough about the number of licensing operations that are out there.
Well, we'd like to call them cartels. There's lots of them in New Hampshire. And while there are certain things where you would want to make sure people have the skills necessary or have the necessary insurance before they engage in a certain kind of activity, there is lots of them where, like a lot of the cosmetology ones, people can't do hair in their house, technically, without being licensed. They do, but they're not supposed to. I am now 19 seconds behind schedule.
Tisk.
That's okay. Well, hey, we're here. I'll just make an adjustment somewhere else. Steve, thank you so much. You're welcome to stay. Gary Daniels is supposed to be in, assuming he found parking and he can get himself up here for the next segment. And,
whatever works for you, I'm available if you'd like to hang out.
Move over to that seat, and
that.
We'll bring Gary in if he gets here, and if not, we'll just keep talking. And I'm Steve McDonald with Skip Murphy, and this is GrokTALK. We'll be right back.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen said, if you like your current health plan, you can keep it. That's not true, Senator. 22,000 New Hampshire citizens have been kicked off their insurance plans. Hospitals in Rochester, Concord, and Portsmouth, they aren't allowed to provide care under the exchange. Senator, you were wrong in your comments. You should apologize for your misleading remarks. I'm calling Senator Shaheen at 750-3004 and telling her I want my doctor back. You should too.
Paid for by SaberPac.org, not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee.
He tried to make us believe he was a fiscal conservative, but State Senator Dave Booton has been deceiving New Hampshire taxpayers. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, he claimed to be one of us, pretending to blend in, but all along, voting like a liberal Democrat. He voted to raise your gas tax by another 23%, taking a bigger bite out of our wallets every time we're at the pump. And oh, how he drooled at the opportunity to vote to expand Obamacare, which will result in higher taxes and longer wait times in the emergency room. And now the Senate wants to pass a bill to prevent us from criticizing Senator Booton's vote? Call Senator Booton at 603-203-5391 and tell him that we're on to his wolf in sheep's clothing routine. Tell him to stop pretending to be a fiscal conservative and start voting like one. Paid for by Citizens for a Strong New Hampshire.
Are you from New Hampshire? Have you ever been to New Hampshire? Has anyone you've known ever sent you a postcard from New Hampshire? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you too can become one of New Hampshire's very own Little Wandering Voters, thanks to the Senator Martha Fuller Clark's Home for the Little Wandering Voters Foundation. With your out-of-state voter participation and your liberal contributions, we can help Senator Martha and all her liberal pals stay in office.
GrokTV.